Good morning. We are excited to continue our series and explore the Bible. We're going to be going into Exodus and then ending with Leviticus. So we got our first lesson here today.
I'm Miles.
Oh, I should introduce you.
Yeah, it's okay. This is authentic because we're both kind of
That's true.
messing around.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
So this looks different than what we've been doing before, doesn't it?
It does. I like it. More conversation.
We have more technology now.
It is. I can hear myself.
Yeah.
I have a weird voice. That's what I'm learning.
All right, what's our lesson today?
All right, our lesson is God sees the plight of his people from Exodus chapter 2 and then Exodus chapter 3.
So this is a new series.
Yes, new series.
We just got done with Acts.
Yeah, right.
And just so teachers can remember, this is this particular curriculum we use, Explore the Bible, is a 9-year plan to go through every book of the Bible.
Right.
And I must be on 9 years because I've already done Acts and Exodus and Leviticus,
Yeah.
so it's kind of feeling like we're going back through, which is pretty fun.
Right.
So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited to be in Exodus and Leviticus. Never actually studied it before. And studying from a teacher side of things, you know the story of Moses, but actually being able to see the content and apply it to your life. Just
That's
even looking
awesome.
at this first one. But
So this first lesson, it really is introductory. Of course, It starts in chapter 2, and we're going verses 23 to 25, and then 7 through 15. So, yeah, that's what it is. We've kind of put a lesson together, an objective statement to go along with the points here. So, what's our objective statement?
So our big focus today on the objective statement is believers can go to God in our distress because of how often he responds to his people. And that brings us to the first point that we have is God hears the prayers of his people. So kind of walk me through, Pastor Ben, of how Moses is leading his people and how we're hearing the prayers of his people.
Well, I'll ask you, Miles.
Okay.
What do we know about, like, Exodus? You know, Moses is the central character, right? He's going to be a central character. We just got done with a central character of Paul in Acts, so now we're looking at Moses in the book of Exodus. What do you know about Moses? This is him actually, today is him talking to God.
Right.
In the burning bush and what's going on there. What do we know about Moses? How did he get to a place where where's he at?
Right. It's interesting when you connect it to right at the end of Genesis, how they all go to Egypt, and there's actually, it seems like hope, but then that hope quickly gets dashed by these pharaohs that come in and want to kill all the babies, and by God's providence, not coincidence, that Moses is preserved and then grows up with the Egyptian people, then gets a little bit of a temper tantrum and kills a guy, and then runs and just plans on being a shepherd his whole life. But God decided to use him because he was listening to the prayers of his people.
And we have a very different political situation than it was.
Right.
Literally, in the early part of Exodus, there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph.
Right.
So Joseph had basically been used by God to preserve Egypt. Is that what we would say? Like he was used by God to make sure that and actually probably to have Egypt become basically a world power because they were sustained when everybody else was dealing with the famine.
Yeah.
Right. So
100%. And then seeing how the Jews are just kind of, it seems like they're falling apart at the seams a little bit, just with all that's happening, the Pharaoh coming after them directly, but Moses seems like he's living his own life.
Right. So he's put into slavery. The Hebrews and the Egyptian culture are equivalent with slaves.
Yes.
Right. To the Egypt, he basically says they're having so many kids. We got to deal with them. So he puts them into slavery. Moses is miraculously included into the family. Moses literally means to draw up or to draw out of the water. So. We know that story, and you can elaborate. The teachers can elaborate on that as they teach it. So that's where we find ourselves today, that the people of God are in bondage. God's chosen people, the father Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, now Joseph and his family, all those that the 12 sons and all of their people that have become a nation within a nation are now in bondage.
Right.
And so this is really the problem that needs to get solved in the book of Exodus is we got to Egypt, but the promised land is not Egypt.
Yeah.
It's the land that was promised to Abraham. How do we get back there? But it's not just a matter of traveling back. We're in bondage.
Yeah.
We're slaves. So how do we do that? And so this theme, that God hears the the prayer, how God often responds to His people is really, and this is the application point. It tells us that we can go to God in our distress. They're definitely in distress. We can go to God in our distress to find out how He, deals with because of how He deals with His people. The first one meaning God hears the prayers of His people, and that's Acts chapter 2, verse 23 to 25. You want to read the text there?
I'd love to. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came upon unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard, next page, heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. So what do you think that last line of God had respect unto them?
I think it means that God gave deference to their prayers. He was listening to their prayers. And actually, I'm going to ask you, Miles.
Yeah.
Where do you see, the point is God hears the prayers of His people, right?
Right.
We don't make the point and then the verses follow. We look for the point in the verses, right?
Right.
So why do you think that we chose God hears the prayers of His people here? Like, point to some scripture, some words in the text.
Well, we see them crying out. You got them sighing, and that's just the idea of them knowing that they're in a bad place, knowing that there's distress.
You see in that phraseology, the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried.
And they cried out, yeah.
What's the difference between sighing and crying?
One seems like a frustration and hopelessness, and then one seems a calling out for hope, looking for that hope. Because they still believe in God this time, but you better believe there were people doubting, where's God right now?
Right.
We had Joseph, we had this family, we had this covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but now there's a change that's happening. So they got to be wavering in their doubt. I know I would be, at least.
What's amazing too is like their main growth as a people happened under bondage. They weren't in bondage all the way in that time, but at some point along that timeline, they did become in bondage. So that's kind of an interesting thought. But yeah, I definitely agree. There's a sighing, like there's like almost like a frustration, right? And then they literally crying out to God.
Yeah. And I love the idea that the cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage, and seeing that God's even responding to His people's sin.
And I love verse 24, and God heard.
Yeah.
God heard.
Right.
And that's really the point. God hears the prayers of His people. It says God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Miles, this comes up a lot in the Old Testament, and that is that it seems like when it says, and God remembered His covenant, does that mean that God had forgotten His covenant?
Right, not at all. Just more so that He's reminding them that He hasn't forgotten. Because these Jews who are suffering pain, they're saying, where's this promise? You made a promise. Are you failing on your promise?
Right.
And that can be applicable for us as well, of just, God, are you hearing my prayer? And then if you are hearing it, are you still going to be good?
Right.
And then him reminding them that He still has this covenant. His promises never fail.
That's right. And it's one of the things that's important in interpretation in the Old Testament is that that so much of the Old Testament and the Bible is written from the observer's point of view.
Right.
So it may seem like, and this is another application point.
Yeah.
There are moments in time where it does seem like God forgets.
Right.
Where you can be in a moment where it's like, it feels like all my prayers are hitting the ceiling. Have you ever felt like that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Frequently sometimes, but especially in hard times, you're just crying out to God, and you don't get an audible voice back. So there's some. Is He listening? Is He not listening?
So it's really good for us to remember that God does hear,
right?
And He hasn't necessarily forgotten. Not necessarily. He hasn't forgotten,
right?
He will keep the promises to His people, but there are times where it may not feel like it,
right?
So that's definitely happening. So I think just a point of application. When we're in distress, it's not wrong for us to cry out to God for help.
Right.
And it's, even though we may be tempted to believe that God doesn't hear and doesn't remember, He really does.
Right.
He really does remember that stuff. That kind of leads us to the next point. What's the next point, Miles?
Our next point is God calls leaders to lead His people. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 3, 7 through 10.
So it skips a little bit ahead.
Right. And then I'll go ahead and read that passage for us. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, And I've heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. Once again, he's hearing. And I know their sorrows. And it's a great thing to know that he knows our sorrows, that he cares. And I came down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land unto a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me. And I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
All right, Miles. Now, this is really important. This is a lesson within a lesson.
Right.
Okay? The teachers are doing this lesson. The verses were chosen for them because we have a 9-year plan to go through every book of the Bible. If they were going to go through every verse, it would take us a lot longer to do that. So it skipped from chapter 2 to chapter 3. And so if you just jump into it like we just did, there's some things that we're missing, right?
Right.
Who's speaking?
Right now we have, it seems as though the Lord is speaking.
Yeah, verse 7, and the Lord said.
Right.
And who is he? Who's he speaking to?
Speaking right to Moses.
So he's speaking to
the
Moses.
burning bush, yeah.
So now we've gone to Moses on the backside of the desert,
right?
He's in the wilderness, and this burning bush is there. It's burning hot and not consumed.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's who's speaking. And really the point of this section, God calls leaders to lead his people, finds itself in verse 10. Right? He's letting Moses know what we already learned, that God has heard the prayers of his people, right? Now he's dealing with, he says, because of this, come now, I love that word, therefore.
Yeah.
Because I heard, I'm doing something. I'm sending you, right?
Right.
Verse 10, I will send thee unto Pharaoh. Now that's an interesting dynamic for Moses. What do you think Moses could be thinking at that moment? I'm sending you to Pharaoh.
Yeah, I think he's thinking he's unqualified and that he goes back, they're just going to kill him like he killed one of their people.
Right. So he definitely has kind of a weird relationship with Egypt right now.
Right. And even with the Jews, so I feel like he goes back. I don't think anybody likes him. The Egyptians are mad at him because he killed someone and ran away. The Jews are mad at him because he seems like a traitor. And now he's being told by God that he just met at a burning bush to go and be a leader.
You're married to a missionary kid, right?
I am, yes, sir.
MKs. Yeah. Some people call MKs third culture kids.
Yeah.
You ever heard that term?
Yes, sir.
Terminology, third culture. The idea is when they're in Africa, let's say, that they're American,
right?
If they're from America, So when they're in Africa, they're American. When they're in America, they're the missionary kid from Africa, right? Yeah. So they have this kind of weird dynamic where they can fit in, but they may not feel like they totally fit in,
right?
Because they feel both, and they always feel in this like third thing, and that's a little bit like Moses, right?
Right.
Moses knows he's a Hebrew, right? And how do we know that Moses knows he's a Hebrew?
I'm not sure actually.
Is there any indication that he may have felt like a connection to the Hebrews?
I would believe so. I don't know.
I love how like spontaneous this is. Really, this is you trying to get into my brain.
Right.
And
no,
so
it's good.
We're working on this.
Yeah.
Do you think that the normal Egyptian would be upset that another Egyptian is beating a Hebrew?
I don't think it would be.
That would not be the normal in the culture. I mean, maybe there are people that feel that way, but
right. It makes me intrigued to know how when he found out that he's a Hebrew was like as a kid, as a teen, or because he saw the pain of those Hebrew people, and like you said, he went and killed him because he's trying to protect his own people.
Does he know he's a Hebrew from the time? Does the princess say, "Oh, you're a Hebrew"?
I'm not sure. I know he went back with his mom, but I mean, then he's a baby,
Right.
So I don't know when he figured it out. Do you think he looks super different from the Egyptians as well?
I tend to think. And maybe we need to study more before we make a podcast. But I would tend to think that he probably saw some kind of visible difference. Okay. I think he does know that he's not an Egyptian like they are.
Right.
And I think that it's indicative of the fact that like he is defending his people. He killed an Egyptian.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got this awkward thing. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think at some point Moses has to wrestle with And maybe this is a moment where, oh, this may be what God's been doing all along.
Right.
I'm supposed to go back to Egypt and talk to Pharaoh, and I think he knows him.
Right.
He knows this Pharaoh, right?
Yeah.
He grew up in the palace, so he has a connection there, and but then also he's a Hebrew, right?
Right.
So it's almost like God has sovereignly, providentially set him up for just this moment, and he may be thinking, what am I doing on this backside of the desert?
Right.
And now God is showing him, this is what I want you to do. I've heard the cry of my people, and I'm sending you that you may bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
Right. It's interesting with our point of how God is calling Moses, because Moses seems like a seemingly nobody, especially this time, or at least he's a murderer, and God still wants to use him. And, we haven't murdered people, and God still wants to use us. But even that further extreme, that God is willing to redeem Moses because of this, and then redeem his people through Moses, that he's using this seemingly nobody. And I think Moses is picking up on that. You can even see in the next chapter, I believe, where he talks about, I can't speak, I need someone else to speak for me. Or if I go, I have to, how are they going to believe me? I got to have a miracle.
Which cracks me up, because how often do we see Aaron speak?
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And when he does speak, it seems like,
yeah, it's like, that's an idol you just made, Aaron.
Bring me your gold.
It's like, Aaron, you should speak, maybe, yeah.
There's a connection between, like, what you say and your character.
Right.
And your preparation. So what we've covered so far, when you're in distress, you cry out to God. And sometimes God will use leaders to help deal with you in your distress. That leads us to this third thing. Miles, here's a question.
Yeah.
Is the leader the only answer?
Absolutely not.
No. So that leads us to number 3. What's the third point?
Let's see if we can get us there. All right. We're on promise, that God promises to be with his people in Exodus chapter 3, 11 to 12. Because we have, in verse 11, it says, Moses said unto God, who am I, that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt?
Hey, that's not a bad question, is it?
Right. Who am I? Yeah.
Well, look, God, you really did good choosing this time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's obviously not a good response. So it's kind of cool that he says, who am I? I think that's a good thing. Keep going.
Right. Cool. And then verse 12, how God kind of redirects Moses' thinking. And he says, certainly I will be with thee. This shall be a token of thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God upon this mountain.
Wow.
Yeah. The guarantee that God gives. And I like that God doesn't really focus on who Moses is. He focuses on who he is. He focuses on the great I am and giving this promise that Moses can rely on.
When we're in distress, it definitely feels like that maybe in that moment that God isn't with us. Right? That's part of the problem, is you feel like, God, do you not see me? Do you not understand what I'm going through?
Right.
Where are you at? You know? And that's why the prayers don't seem to hit. And what's interesting is, who are the ones praying
right now
in the text?
In the text, it's the Israelites,
children of Israel,
the slaves right now. Yeah.
And as they're praying, when did God start preparing His answer?
As they were crying out.
Well, yeah. I mean, if Moses is at least part of the answer,
right.
And obviously we know God knows from before the foundation of the world what's going to happen, but He had, through a baby,
already had this providential
had this plan that He's included in place. He's had a baby in the palace for all these years, and it's a Jewish baby that's being raised, and then now He's sending him to go back. So while they're praying and probably thinking, God, when are you going to do this?
Right, He's already working at it.
Yeah. 80 years ago for us was what? Like, Teddy, I mean,
it was a while ago. I was
math in real old time is like Teddy Roosevelt, or whatever that is. We probably shouldn't have even brought that up because now it's on the internet. But I mean, you think about 80 years ago. That's a lot. I mean, to think politically 80 years ago, it's a totally different landscape than what we are now. And so to think about, of course, part of this, the Pharaoh died. Now they're in bondage. They're in distress. They may feel like for a long time God isn't answering, but He's with them the whole time. He's already been working. He's already been answering their prayers, even though they may not feel it.
Yeah. He's been working behind the scenes. And even in front, sometimes we just don't see it. We get so focused on our own circumstances, that we don't go back to his promises. Because he's
Right.
never once failed on his promise,
Right.
He never will.
Right.
Well, that doesn't mean we don't sometimes doubt. I know I can guarantee every teenager I've taught has asked, who am I? Like, what is my identity? What am I supposed to be doing?
Right.
And God answers by what he's doing.
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful comfort of this promise.
That is really good. So God says basically, and here the promise is made to Moses.
Right.
Hey, I'm not going to send you to do something and not go with you.
Yeah.
And I think about the Great Commission.
Right. That was the promise, the guarantee at the end.
Yeah. And I'll go with you even unto the end of the age, right?
Right.
Similar thing. So God promises to be with his people, and especially here with his leader,
right,
Moses. And then that leads to this last point.
Yes, sir. That God reveals himself to his people. And that's in Exodus chapter 3, 13 through 15. We'll start in verse 13. And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, The God of your fathers hath sent me unto you. And they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. That
is a profound
right
statement. God said unto Moses, I am that I am. This is almost unfair of me to do this.
Okay,
but what does that mean, Miles?
That I am, I like studying it because everyone seems to have a different opinion sometimes. But
yeah, absolutely.
Just saying that God has always been the one existing, always been the one sustaining, always been sovereign. It's that idea of Yahweh. When you see the capital letters of the Lord and the reverence that is there, and seeing that everything flows from him. And I think it's interesting that that's what Moses has to go and say, and people would have been shocked by that in their culture. That's a big statement to make.
Right. Yeah. The idea that some say, and I think it's true, is that it's this idea of like self-existence.
Right.
He is the reason for his own existence.
Yeah.
Right. He is the uncaused.
Right.
And what I would say the first cause. So I think that idea that I am, and the curriculum says something about I will be what I will be.
Yeah.
And I think that's I will be who I will be suggests that the name focuses on the future, not just the past.
Right.
And the present. So I think that there's something to that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing that we still serve that great I am. Amen. As well. That Moses knew he could go and say this because this wasn't relying on his power. It's a great thing to know that God doesn't rely on us, and our own good works. He relies on himself. We get to trust in him.
There's something too about the power in that. Before we started this this recording, the device that we're using to record our audio, just shut off because the battery was out, right, and so we had to go get some other form of power to power this kind of a thing. So this is a weird idea, but the power that's needed to get this thing going comes from some other third party. Yeah. Right. And the same is true for us, right? That life had to start because God initiated it. You're like, well, my mom and dad. Well, yeah, but who started? You keep going back. So really, God is the source of all life, right? And he needed no source for himself. And so I guess one of the things that's kind of interesting is in moments of distress, we have a God who is on our side who does not need anything. Right. Yeah. He is his own source of power. Right.
It's amazing to think he's never gotten tired, never gotten anxious. I know Moses, if I was Moses' shoes, I'm about to go up to Pharaoh. I'm going to be anxious. I got to throw a stick down and then pray that it turns into a snake. And I got to have all these things. But he's now focusing on the great I am. And that should make us quiver in our boots sometimes. Yes. I think sometimes we say that flippantly, but we even think about the Jews. They were so careful even writing it down. It was just so holy, and just seeing how it's so holy for a reason. Right.
Moses, who sent you?
Yeah.
The one who needs power from no one.
Right.
The one whose power comes from. I mean, everybody exists. Paul quoted the poets we just studied. Yeah. In him we live and move and have our being. Right. So it's in him that all of this comes from, and so So Miles, you know what that means for us is that no matter what we face, if we're on God's side, we have everything we need, right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. So, okay, so let's just summarize some key points of application, right? God hears us when we call out to Him, right? Yeah. So what do you think we should do then?
I think we should call out to Him. I think we should pray.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see that and I get mad at God not seeming like He's hearing me, but have I actually prayed about it? You know, like God, I just expect you to fix it. But I never went to you and actually depended on you. I still try to do my own power. But have you
ever tried to do something and you go down this road with a plan? Maybe it's even a good plan.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a ministry initiative or something. Right. And then you realize, I never prayed and asked God what I should do.
And then you actually do it, and it's weird. It actually helps,
And you know what I noticed that I didn't do it when I mess up.
Right.
When it goes well, it's like, you're welcome, God.
Right. Yeah.
And God blesses in spite of me. But I think, So I think I agree with you. We should go to God.
Right.
And what's cool is He wants to hear our prayers.
He's the sovereign creator, but He actually wants to hear about His creation. He cared about His people. He cares about us.
Another one, God works through His people to accomplish His plans. So I think that's important for us to realize that any blessing or any good that comes really because of God, not because of us.
Right.
It's kind of this tension that we need to be wise and work hard and make plans and ask God to give us plans and to do that. But on the other hand, all the glory goes to Him in it.
Yeah.
So
because we really are unqualified, but He's the one that makes us qualified.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So then believers can be assured of God's presence when we follow Him. That's what He says, I'll be with you. We can be assured that He's with us.
Yeah.
And then last, God is not distant in our times of distress. He desires an ongoing relationship with His people. So you deal with students, right?
Right.
How would this uniquely, I can say uniquely, or how could you connect with students as you give a lesson like this?
I think one of the biggest things that stuck out to me is first when God sees our problems and He sees that we are actually struggling, because teenagers struggle. They just try to do it all by themselves and hide, and they think they're the only ones that are struggling sometimes. Mm-hmm. But it's an amazing comfort to know that God sees them, because sometimes teenagers don't feel seen. So not only did God see their problems, He wants to use them as His ambassadors. He wants to use them as disciple makers. And that's what's great about, there's not this sort of qualification I should have of I got to be this sort of person, be this smart, do this certain thing. It's that God qualifies us and uses us. So for teens who are asking every day, they look in the mirror, who am I? It's who God defines you. It's the great I am that you put your faith and trust in. And then now they can actually go and, God sees my problems. God sees even my potential and what He can do. And then now I can go out into my school day knowing He's right with me. Because I think of those kids that go to public school, not that public schools, it's bad, but it's hard to go to Christian school. Just they have influences around them, but knowing that God's with them and strengthening them and guiding them, that their power doesn't rely on themselves.
Here's another question I've got, and I think I've got an answer to it, but I think it's always important, even in a Sunday school class, to realize that there are people in that class, potentially, on any given Sunday, that don't understand the gospel.
Right.
They don't understand, and I feel like there's got to be a place for us to kind of include that,
right,
without doing damage to the text, right?
100%.
Like we don't want to say something that's not true,
right?
So, in one of the ways I think you do that is to deal with the fallen condition, because there's a fallen condition that needs to be redeemed in any given passage. Why is it being? Well, because we're not, because God is, right? So, in this particular text, what would you say is a touch point for the gospel?
I think just thinking of their bondage, and then how they seem so stuck, and how we seem so stuck in our sin,
right?
And then seeing that Christ came in and entered in, and God still promises His presence. God still desires that ongoing relationship, desires that reconciliation that Christ brings as the propitiation. This is some $5 words right there, but just an amazing thing that Exodus point is all about redemption. It's all about how God is purchasing us back, and just as He's getting His people back from that slavery, just as He wants to get us back from our slavery to sin.
That's exactly right. I think that God hears our prayers, and the first prayer that He hears when we, in terms of a relationship, would be the prayer to call out on
Right.
Him.
Yeah. Romans 10:9.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to tell people that the pain point you have that you don't even realize you have, maybe,
Right.
is that you're a sinner in need of a Savior.
Right.
Right.
It's no wonder things are so miserable for you because you haven't gone to the Savior.
Right.
Yes. 100%.
I think that a lot of people, and as I'm thinking about adults, there are a lot of people that are in distress. They're in marriages that they thought would work better. Sometimes their kids aren't. Later on, their kids walk away from the values maybe that they taught them, and you just wonder, like, okay, God, do you care? Do you know about this situation? And I've seen it over and over again that God was already working.
Right.
Before we knew that He was working,
right?
And we have to have that kind of faith to know that. And then the other thing is we don't want to blame God for the bad choices of other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's the other kind of tough spot that we find ourselves in. Is like, okay, God, why aren't you doing something? Well, they're doing something.
Right.
they're doing wrong. So there's that part of it too. Lots here. You could do a ton of application.
You could. Yes, you could do about 3 sermons out of this.
Yeah,
that's good.
Amen. Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Miles, and teachers do a great job on Sunday.
Amen.
All right.